Hey, this is the video for 1.5, the nitrogen cycle. So go ahead and check out the overview and set up your guided notes. So the nitrogen cycle is the second of the biogeochemical cycles. I will say it's probably more confusing just because you're not maybe familiar with the different components. But I've provided a few tools for you to remember. So this is an overview of the cycle. And I've drawn it this way. You won't see it any other way. This is something I created. But it also matches up with this nice little image here. So we'll be practicing this throughout the year. But each one of these components, if you see here, N2, NH4, NH4 would be here, NO3 here, the NH2 here, and everything down here in the brown area, here in the gray area, represents underground, and everything up here is above ground. You'll notice that most of the nitrogen cycle takes place underground. Also, most of the nitrogen cycle takes place with the help of bacteria. That is something that you need to remember. So I'm going to break it up by the steps. The first step is when you have biological fixation. That is when you have rhizobium bacteria that is converting nitrogen from N2 to NH4. NH4 is ammonium. You'll see ammonium and ammonia. Ammonia is NH3, ammonium is NH4. You don't really have to differentiate between the two, but if you see NH3, it can mean the same thing as NH4. Now, this will be done by the action of bacteria in the roots of legumes and alfalfa and clover. Alfalfa is a plant I will show you in a bit. There'll be a slide. Legumes are plants like beans, peas, soybeans, peanuts. Anything that kind of has a shell, like a bean or a pea or a peanut. And they have little tiny nodules in their roots, and that's where the bacteria live. So again, first step is biological fixation. The next step is nitrification. And nitrification takes place with the action of nitrifying bacteria. And that is something that decomposers will do. It's when ammonium and ammonia is broken down and converted into NO3, which is nitrate. You must remember, in fact, you're going to have to remember all of these chemical formulas throughout this year, so just commit them to memory now. Again, NO3, nitrate. Now, assimilation. Again, assimilation is when plants and animals take compounds and make them part of their own body tissue. And assimilation can happen when plants and soil bacteria are taking in this ammonium and the nitrate, and they're converting it into amino acids or proteins. So assimilation, they're using that to make proteins. NH2 is the functional group in a protein, in an amino acid. It's definitely required for a lot of our biological tissues. Also, nitrogen is found in DNA as well as the nitrogenous base. So a lot of this, nitrogen is a very important nutrient, biologically speaking. The next step is ammonification. And that is when these organisms die, they're converted back to ammonium. And this organism dies and it decomposes and is again converted from the protein back to ammonia. So these steps can happen, this is one step. Assimilation goes this way, then it can also be ammonification. We'll be doing an activity in class that is very similar to what's happening in real life. And then finally we have denitrification. And that takes place with the action of denitrifying bacteria. And it's an anaerobic process. In other words, there is no oxygen present, but the nitrate in the soil is being converted into atmospheric nitrogen. N2 is a very stable form. It is a molecule, and it is an atmospheric nitrogen. Most of the atmosphere, in fact, 78% of the atmosphere is composed of nitrogen. So one thing that is not mentioned in this diagram, but it is shown in this diagram, is abiotic fixation. And abiotic fixation occurs when it is converted from nitrogen in the atmosphere directly to nitrate. And that is usually from anything that is very high energy, like lightning strikes. So anytime you have a lightning strike, you can have that converting atmospheric nitrogen directly into nitrates. But again, that is not part of this diagram that I've shown you. You oftentimes will not see it in a printed out diagram. So alfalfa is one of the plants that is a nitrogen fixer. This was taken in Ecuador when I was there this past summer. And if you look on the plant, you'll see these little tiny nodules, and this is where the bacteria live. So you can see these little tiny little dots in there, and again, that is where the rhizobium bacteria live and convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. Now, there's also a mnemonic, and this is basically something you can use to remember this. And this acronym, this mnemonic, is called FIXNAD ANPAN. And this represents the process on the top row. This represents the product. So, fixation produces ammonium. Oh, look, right here, fixation produces ammonium. The next step, nitrification produces nitrates. Nitrification produces nitrates. Next one, assimilation produces proteins. Assimilation produces proteins. Then we have ammonification produces ammonium. Ammonification produces ammonium. And then finally, denitrification produces nitrogen. So denitrification is here and it produces nitrogen. That's why I drew out this diagram. If you just remember fixation is the first step and it starts from the atmosphere, then you can pretty much figure the rest out, and we'll do a little bit of practice with this in class. Now, ammonia versus nitrate. So most of the soil particles are negative, which means that ammonium is held in the soil and nitrates will easily run off. So if there is ammonium, it's better to, it's again held strongly because opposites attract. We have negative clay particles that will attract the positively charged ammonium. Now, whenever something runs off, it can contribute to eutrophication. Eutrophication is when there's a high level of nutrients being passed to a body of water, and that body of water gets a lot of nutrients, which means the algae will grow. Then the algae will block out the sunlight and kill some of the plants, and when the algae die, then their decomposition requires bacteria. The bacteria use up all the oxygen in the water, so it can actually lead to hypoxia or a loss of oxygen. So eutrophication is, in this course, it's really a bad thing. It can be good in certain situations, but we would consider eutrophication to be bad. And whenever you see it, there's multiple steps involved. Again, high level of nutrients causes a bloom, an algal bloom. The algae grow exponentially. They use up all the nutrients, then the algae die, and then bacteria, as they're decomposing the plants and the algae, will use up all the oxygen in the water. And then that causes fish to die, leading to biodiversity loss. How can we impact the nitrogen cycle? Well, when we use synthetic fertilizers, that's fertilizers that are produced in a laboratory. It's not produced from organic material. It's not produced from anything alive. It's artificial. It is synthetic. It is inorganic fertilizers. We use nitrates because that is a very high demand limiting nutrient, so plants will grow very, very well with nitrates. But if it's not used right away, it can easily run off because it is not held strongly by the soil. So that can lead to eutrophication. Also, when you add nitrates, you're speeding up the denitrification. And part of the denitrification, which I did not include in this diagram originally, was nitrous oxide, N2O, also known as laughing gas, but that is a greenhouse gas. So if you're adding more nitrates to the soil, it goes down here, the denitrification can actually increase the amount of nitrous oxide, which can lead to climate change. I would like you to respond to this check for understanding. And for FRQ practice, I want you to explain how agriculture can impact the nitrogen cycle. I hope that this video was informative. I thank you for your attention, and I will see you soon.